Oui, à nouveau, rebonjour. On continue avec le sujet des technologies. Et sur ce sujet, c'est avec EY que nous avons travaillé le contenu, le format et trouver les intervenants qui vont bien. Alors, de quoi souhaitons-nous parler ? Nous souhaitons mettre en avant des technologies clés qui aident les entreprises à être résilientes, à être plus agiles. Alors, on en a évoqué ce matin, intelligence artificielle, blockchain, et j'en passe. Voilà, dans le numérique, on n'en manque pas. La question, c'est toutes ces big data, comment les traiter, comment les prendre en compte, et qu'est-ce qu'elles vont réellement changer dans nos façons de faire, nous, entreprises, et quels sont les enjeux qui sont là derrière. Alors pour cela, nous sommes en lien avec CUDAHY d'Atlanta. Hello Greg, good morning.
Hi Bernard.
You can hear me. Thank you. I hope you are fine. Welcome to the Atlanpole Forum. We are here with another Grégory BAUER, one of my colleagues from Atlanpole, and he has got a few questions for you. But firstly, who are you, Greg? So I've got
Sure, let me give you a little bit of background. I've spent multiple decades in the industry. First of all, most importantly, really pleased to be here with my French colleagues. I brought my French flag just in case, and really glad to be with your entrepreneurial community here. I'm the global tech, media, and telecommunications leader for EY. And, a lot of people may not realize, yes, we're a Big Four accounting firm, but we also have the last 35 years in a row been the #1 supporter of technology IPOs every single year. So we work for a lot of the major companies, Microsoft, Nokia, Samsung, et cetera, but we also support the entrepreneurial community across the globe. And my role is leading about 12-13% of our $40 billion enterprise.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So maybe to start the discussion, so the world has been facing last year the coronavirus crisis, and the first question we could ask is, what's the impact? What has been the global impact of the crisis on the development of the disruptive technologies?
Yeah, so I think, look, let's first acknowledge that the pandemic has been sort of just horrific for many people personally and enterprise-wide. It is we've now got an economy that's the second worst unemployment since the Great Depression, or actually the first since the Great Depression. And so there's a lot of downside. I want to make sure I start with that. But from a technology perspective, it's been absolutely explosive growth. The pandemic and frankly, free enterprise combined have created an acceleration of digital in 10 months that we have just not seen in 5 to 10 years of chief technology officers trying to push digital transformation. So it's been explosive growth, not only in the impact in society and enterprise, but also I think in investment. Because what's really happened right now is you've seen the majors like a Microsoft and others of the large caps grow explosively since March. But you've also seen the acquisition side and the startup side really accelerate as well due to fulfilling all the digital needs out there.
So are you saying that despite all the money that has been put on to solve all the problems linked to the crisis, there has still been some money available to encourage development of these technologies, like on the public side and on the private side?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up public-private, especially, because I think what's happened is the pandemic has given an impetus to doing this. And it's kind of like, if you know what a flywheel is, it takes a little effort to get it started, but once it starts rolling, really see right now that that this is really going to sustain post the pandemic, whatever that looks like. because it is going to be a different world. People are, in many cases, not going to regularly return to offices. But I think also if you look at some societies like Estonia, which is highly digital already, and how they were able to navigate the pandemic, many countries are looking at, we really have to get more aggressively digital. So we see this sustaining well beyond the pandemic.
Okay, and for everyone to understand a bit better what we are thinking of when we talk about disruptive technologies, could you give us some example of these technologies? What are they exactly?
Right. I think there's four that we look at that are predominant. Cloud is assumed anymore. If you're not, I'm surprised how many people are still developing on-premise stuff, but cloud is assumed. It's really AI, blockchain, 5G, and robotics, whether that be, and you can see we've got a little map here, whether that's software robotics or whether that's actual robots. What you can see is that we've got here some examples of the things that we've done with clients. And that includes things like what we've called the Enterprise Resiliency Hub, which companies are using AI and robotics to actually deal with all these things from the crisis of working remotely. But also, I think what's important here is that it's not just are you using these things, but are you using them at scale? And that's the big change. Overall, this is about creating more resilient companies, whether it's B2C or B2B. The whole notion is about using these technologies for resilience.
Okay, and if you had to give us an example of a product that is already on the market that maybe we are using or we are about to use because it's going to reach the market, could you give us one or two specific examples?
Yeah, and I'll use mostly, I think the focus has been enterprise. There's been some consumer, but I'll give you some great examples of things that we've been involved with. A lot of these things are what I would call boring but important. And these are in the public domain when I use client names, but Microsoft, for example, for their Xbox platform, is now using blockchain, AI, and software robotics, or robotic process automation, for all of the smart contracts with all of their game developers. So what used to take hundreds of people to track contracts and to pay for usage and things like that, now is done at the speed of light using what we call smart contracts, but which is intelligent automation, using especially blockchain keeps it all secure, and the AI and the RPA makes it fast. Other examples are some things that we're doing with the pandemic. One of the things in the US in particular, but also internationally, is this desire to avoid technicians coming to your house when you have a cable box for cable television. And now we've been able to work with a company called Relational AI, and we're able to go ahead and have a consumer use their smartphone to take video of their set-top box, and you have AI analyze if there's connectivity issues. And that AI then, reduces the number of requirements for a technician to come to someone's home by 50%. That happened in a few months, really fast. It's not just that the technology can be deployed, but from idea to actually in the market is very fast. Another example that we're doing is using drones to actually look at cell towers. Instead of having technicians climb up, look at cell towers for problems, we're able to actually look at drones and also create a database of cell towers where we can now anticipate problems before they happen. So I think those are great examples of what's happening out there. There's a lot more. The disruption of legal services. For large companies, they use legal firms all over the world to translate legal documents. That can now be done in a fraction of a second by AI, reducing the cost by 90%. So those are some examples of real-world applications of the disruptive technologies in the last just 9 months.
Okay, so in fact, what you are saying is that these technologies that seem to be far from us in just a few years ago are now in our day-to-day life, but sometimes we don't even realize they are around us. And you mentioned a bit earlier in the discussion an example of a country like Estonia using these new technologies at a scale of a whole country, would you have some other example, or maybe give us a bit more details about what's happening in Estonia, for instance, with disruptive technologies?
Sure. And I think it's interesting to see some very developed countries that aren't as digital. And the interesting thing about my view of Estonia, at least, is that their connection between the government and the citizens is highly digital, and that includes healthcare. So from the time that individuals are given information to the time that they're using what we call teledoc, so remote physician access, they can be assessed, and all of the financial aspects, all of the healthcare record aspects, all of the physician appointment that is done digitally. Importantly, yes, it can decide whether someone comes in, but it also helps the system not be overwhelmed, because you can also decide that somebody shouldn't come in. And so, again, this is not, as a tech professional, I find this very exciting. The average citizen doesn't even think about it in some of these much more, I think the same is true in South Korea, which is very digitally enabled between the citizens and the government and the healthcare providers. And I think other societies that are highly digital on the consumer side, but aren't as digital on the government side, did not do as well at prioritizing healthcare in some cases. In fact, I've got an article coming out about this. But I do think that it's very remarkable, the difference between highly digital societies in a pandemic and those that are wealthy but not as digital at the public level.
Okay, so in fact, you've been mentioning like South Korea, Europe, the United States in the different examples that you have been giving. Mm-hmm. What can explain the differences that we see in the different parts of the world in the use of and the development of new technologies?
Yeah, I think it's different depending on where you are. I work a lot in India, and we talk about some other things. We've talked about the access to, cable or to satellite or things like that. But the fact is that places like India, it's really about 5G. And 5G over the next few years is going to add 2 billion new consumers onto the internet. But that's also 2 billion new citizens with internet access, and also at a speed using 5G that's just unheard of. So there's not this, you don't have anything, then you get cable, et cetera. Now there's a leapfrog with 5G. And I think what happens is access as consumers to the developing world is going to increase, but it's also going to make a big difference in healthcare outcomes. One of the things that we've seen so far in the last few months that's become a priority that never would have been is the use of AI in vaccine prioritization and vaccine distribution. And I think that, there's an important part there, is that a lot of these things that could have been done before weren't done until the pandemic made them an absolute requirement. So again, terrible situation with the pandemic, but a huge silver lining, if I can say that this is really going to improve society with advanced digitalization.
Okay, so you suggest that we can say that we are seeing right now a kind of an acceleration of the use and of putting in place these new technologies to satisfy some new needs that have been emerging with the pandemic.
That's right.
So when we've been talking about the 5G, robotics, artificial intelligence. So these are topics that are very, very different, and technologies that are very, very different. Would there be something in common between all these technologies? Something that we need to make them work?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think, first of all, standalone, a lot of the programs before the pandemic were individual uses of AI, individual uses of blockchain, individual uses of RPA, robotic process automation. And what we've seen is, for them to be effective, they have to come together. And I think, given all the French entrepreneurs you have on today, I think there's a good way to think about this, is that the technologies have to come together to feed artificial intelligence. I have a strong point of view that if you're an entrepreneur, and if you're not currently using AI or have plans to apply AI in your business model, you will be outdated rather quickly. And to what you've said there, Gregory, is the one thing that's been a challenge on all this is data availability. The technologies work. Honestly, most of these technologies have been around for some time. The management theory's been around, but the ability to find the data, get sufficient data to make them work well is a difficulty, especially since it might reside on different platforms. It might be stranded on someone's laptop. And that's why we talk about something called data fabric, which is the ability to weave all these different data sources together in near real time to allow these advanced technologies, especially AI, to work. So that to me is, if there's anything that I ask your viewers to take away today, it's not just that it's going to be a continual time of advancement of disruptive technologies, but that if you don't have them in your own business plan, if you haven't talked about data sufficiency and how you'll continue to improve data, you're probably going to struggle versus some of the advanced competitors who are already doing those things. So I think it's really important that you build those into your business plans.
Okay, but if the data is key, what do you think about the recent European regulation called RGPD that has been put up in place in Europe to try and protect the privacy of data of citizens? Is it going to slow down the development of all these technologies, and would it create a difference between what's happening in Europe and what's going to happen in the US or in Asia, for instance?
So it's interesting. I love that question, by the way, because there's this view, not just in Europe, but all in the world, that data privacy and data availability are things that compete with each other. And frankly, if we were in a world that was optimal, no, we would have to trade those things off. But honestly, we can improve in both areas. And I think, like, I won't give any of the confidential client examples, but many of our clients in the US, healthcare is currently private. And what they have to do to make sure that their patients are taken care of, they have to really, there's a thing called HIPAA, which is very similar for healthcare data in the US. And it requires a tremendous level of stringency in protecting individual data. But actually, with things like blockchain and things that are quite immutable in terms of being able to be hacked and things like that, the technologies allow you to advance both. As to your question as to what will happen in reality, I think having, I've lived or worked in 35 countries. I've worked for a French company for over 3 years. And I think the real challenge here is not whether it can happen, but whether it will happen. And my hope is that if you look at the example of some EU member countries that have done much better than others through the pandemic, they've figured out that public-private combination that works, where government and free enterprise are not in competition. They're in collaboration in the best sense. So that's kind of my view on things. I'm actually very hopeful. I think particularly forums like yours today, I'm really excited about, because it's not a limitation of the brain power, the access to capital, the access to technology. I mean, this idea that all great ideas start in a Starbucks in Silicon Valley is dead. Everybody knows it. It's a real question of focus, and it's a real question of bringing the right teams and relationships together. So I'm quite hopeful that what you just mentioned is not a limitation, but uses the good examples from some EU member countries to really accelerate this public-private partnership.
Thank you for sharing this view, Greg. It's already the end of the discussion. It was very interesting. I want to thank you especially because we know you've been waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be with us this morning. So thank you. And so let's meet again in 1 year to see how all these technologies have evolved in year 2021.
Great. That sounds great. Thanks for having me, and I hope the rest of the session goes well.
Thank you very much, Greg, for your interesting speech. We understand that data is a key factor to be resilient and competitive. So, now, on va reprendre en français pour la suite. Merci beaucoup pour cette session. Merci Grégory d'avoir largement contribué à la bonne compréhension et aux bons échanges avec Greg. Et sachez que vous pouvez retrouver cet après-midi les experts d'EY, que ce soit sur les sujets juridiques, les sujets de stratégie, les sujets de technologie, les sujets de transformation de l'entreprise. Ils sont à votre disposition à partir de 14h et tout l'après-midi pour des rendez-vous. Même chose que précédemment, vous allez sur la plateforme dans la rubrique partenaires et vous pouvez prendre rendez-vous pour cet après-midi. Voilà 2-3 précisions pour ce qui va suivre. Nous allons avoir plusieurs sessions en parallèle. Alors vous pouvez rester avec nous pour suivre la session « Que sont-ils devenus ?» Que sont-ils devenus? C'est des retours d'expérience d'anciennes startups qui sont plus forcément très jeunes, mais qui ont plein de choses à nous dire et à partager sur leur parcours, les difficultés qu'ils ont pu rencontrer, les succès et les challenges qu'ils ont pu relever. En parallèle, vous pouvez tout à fait suivre des ateliers qui sont dans des salles virtuelles. L'accès se fait par la plateforme et les collaborateurs d'Atlanpole vous présenteront dans des ateliers les modes d'accompagnement des startups, les modes d'accompagnement des PME innovantes, les modes d'accompagnement des projets deep tech et également les différents moyens d'accéder aux aides européennes. Voilà, et avec beaucoup de facilité, vous pouvez rejoindre un atelier, rejoindre le plateau, profiter des deux, zapper si vous le souhaitez, il n'y a aucun problème, vous êtes libre. Tout ce qu'on vous demande, c'est vous retrouver ici sur le plateau vers 12h40 pour la clôture du forum. Voilà, parce qu'on aura beaucoup de choses à se dire en conclusion de toutes ces interventions. Voilà, sans plus attendre, nous démarrons avec « Que sont-ils devenus ?»